Good morning, JNUC, and welcome to our presentation, Cisco ISE with multiple MDMs. I'm pausing here for a brief moment for you to review our forward-looking statement. It is also available for detailed review if you'd like under Resources. According to my notes, I'm supposed to pause for a full 5 seconds. I think that's good, so we're going to move forward and talk about us. My name is Chris Jossi. I'm the lead engineer at Rocketman. Rocketman is a Jamf-only, Apple-only based MSP located in the United States. I'm also CCT, CCA, CCE, CJA, Jamf 300 and Jamf 400 level certified. For my Jamf certifications, I'm also a Jamf integrator, and Rocketman is also a Jamf MSP and a Jamf partner. Above me is Brock Richards. Hi, Brock.
Hey, Christopher. I'm Brock Richards. I'm a service delivery manager and solution architect at Nutrien. Nutrien is one of the largest crop input companies in the world. And I don't have nearly as many certificates as Christopher. I have a few network certificates, but I don't think anyone really cares at JNUC.
I think people care. What network certificates do you have, Brock?
I have a CCNA and a CCNP, and I'm working on a CCIE.
Ooh, okay. Those are some good ones. I started looking at those certifications, and I was like, no.
Well, now that I have a kid, the CCIE is kind of, you look at it and you're like, do I?
Yeah. Moving forward, I forgot our first joke. I already ruined it, Brock.
Damn it.
I was supposed to say that right after we gave our names, and it was going to be really cool.
Well, it still looks good.
Yeah. Anyway, our presentation is Cisco ISE with multiple MDMs. As the name probably implies, this is a very specific scenario we're presenting on. So as a little disclaimer, if you don't know what Cisco ISE is, and you're not using your Cisco ISE in your environment, and you don't plan on using it in your environment at some point in the future, or use it at all in any capacity, this probably isn't the presentation for you. Also, as another disclaimer, this is a 400 level presentation, so we are assuming that you have a base level knowledge with some type of scripting and whatever language that you use, and basic understanding of how REST APIs work. If you don't, I'll warn you now, you might be getting lost during the presentation. Today, we're going to talk about what Cisco ISE is, the problem with Cisco ISE when using multiple MDMs, and the solution we came up with. So to start off, what is Cisco ISE?
All right. Well, Cisco ISE, it's definitely, I guess I would call it a beast. It's a pretty big application, and it's a very important one. So basically what Cisco ISE does, or the Cisco Identity Services Engine, is it is the gatekeeper. It is the thing that allows you onto my network. So it allows, more specifically, your devices, your Apple devices, your Android devices, your Windows devices, whatever it is. It talks to ISE, and ISE is like, yeah, you're allowed to join my network or not. And then specific to this conversation, this presentation, we're going to be talking about Cisco ISE and how it works with our MDM providers and gathering MDM compliancy. So one of the key things is, if you don't have just like a basic Windows Active Directory joined workstation, I need some way to know if your device or this device is supposed to be on my network, and if it's compliant to be on my network based on a policy. So MDM compliance pulled down from an MDM provider, and working with ISE gives that context of, this is a company-owned MacBook Pro, and this MacBook Pro is compliant and allowed to be joined to my network. So let's take a look at a quick graphic here to visualize how Cisco ISE works.
Awesome. And just talking about the MDM compliance piece quickly, because we're talking about Jamf. We don't have any slides setting up that integration with Jamf and Cisco ISE. Most of that integration is happening on ISE's side. But if you're in Jamf, if you go to system settings and network integrations, that's where you kind of set up the MDM compliance piece.
Correct. So real quick visualization, you have your device that's talking to your MDM. In this case, we're looking at InTune. And your ISE has already been associated with that MDM or integrated with that MDM, if you will. So then your device goes ahead and tries to connect to your network there. And your network goes and talks to ISE and says, hey, ISE, is this device supposed to be allowed? ISE goes and makes a quick API call to your respective MDM, in this case Intune. The MDM replies back that, yes, I know about this device. Yes, it's compliant. And ISE responds back saying, here's the associated authorization profile. Away you go.
Awesome. And that all looks great, Brock. So then what is the problem? So in our environment, we're not just using one MDM, we're using multiple MDMs. And the thing about multiple MDMs is there's only one MDM to rule them all. As a side note, I swear at some point collectively as a society, we're going to stop referencing Lord of the Rings. But today is not that day. That's my one joke I actually had planned for the presentation. So thanks for bearing with me through that, everyone. But yeah, Cisco ISE does support, it supports multiple MDMs, but only works out of the box with one MDM provider at a time. So to talk a little bit more about what that means, I'm going to turn this back over to Brock.
Yeah, so again, with our visualization here, so we have Cisco ISE already integrated with Intune, the one MDM to rule it all, or in this case, the first MDM we configured. So what we got going on now is we have our devices being associated to multiple MDMs. So introduce Jamf and Mass 360 into the mix. And that's all fine and dandy. Cisco ISE has the ability to integrate with multiple MDMs. We can definitely configure that API integration, no problem. The issue is that when the device goes to try and authenticate with those, or with the network, ISE goes, I don't know which MDM you belong to. I have no context to know, like, are you a Jamf device or are you an Intune device? And so it's unable to query an MDM, or more specifically, it's only going to query one MDM, and that's the first MDM that was configured, in this case Intune. So your devices are only going to successfully authenticate 50 or 25% of the time, depending on how many MDMs you have, because it's only ever going to talk to the one based on our authorization policies.
Yeah, and while we're on this slide, Brock, I want to talk quickly about the profiling engine, because technically that can take a specific MAC address and say, hey, let's send our iPhones to, Intune, and our Mac computers to Jamf. Correct? That's kind of how it works.
Absolutely, and that'd be a really good use case if we had all of our iPhones and all of our MacBooks and all of our iPads managed by different MDMs, as an example, or some combination like that. It would be pretty simple to say, profiling engine, if you see an iPad join, go talk to Mass 360. If you see an iPhone join, go talk to Jamf. If you see a MacBook join, go talk to Jamf. The issue is, at least in our environment, is these devices, like iPads as an example, are not managed by just Jamf. iPads are managed by all three MDMs for different business units and for different use cases. So as a result, the profiling engine falls down in that case. And also, just speaking from experience with Cisco ISE and really any NAC for that matter, is the profiling engine is not 100%. And I want to be, especially when I'm talking about denying or granting access to a network that provides business function, I want to be as close to 100% as possible. So again, we mentioned Cisco ISE does support multiple MDMs. So you're thinking to yourself, like, why is this a problem? Why is it only talking to one MDM? And really it's about the architecture and the speed. You really want your TACX provider or your radius provider to be as fast as possible when your devices are joining your network. When they're roaming on the wireless, you need that radius server to respond back ASAP. The problem is that Cisco ISE is only going to talk to one MDM, the first MDM, and if that MDM says, like, I don't know about this device, ISE is going to stop. It's not going to requery the next MDM down the list and then the next MDM down the list, because that's going to be too slow. Every API call is precious time that we don't want to waste. So on Cisco's implementation, they don't have that capability. So real quick example to show that we can configure multiple MDMs within Cisco ISE. We're not lying. under administration MDM, external MDM configuration, you have your MDM servers, and here we can see that we have Azure and Jamf configured with the respective names. And you can actually, if you really wanted to, and what we're going to talk about here in this presentation could apply to this use case as well, but you could have multiple of the same MDM, and that's really key as well. If you're a company that's based off of mergers or acquisitions, and you acquire another company that has Intune already or has Jamf already, and you don't want to integrate those MDMs just yet, but you want your authentication system to talk to multiple, you can configure multiple here. Just call it Jamf 2 or Azure 2.
Yeah, we definitely know a thing or two about mergers and acquisitions.
Yeah, that's for sure.
They are fun.
So real quickly, in the policy set within Cisco ISE, and this is what it would look like with one MDM. If you had only one MDM configured, it's a pretty basic policy. So you basically have your machine AD auth, and that's just for your Windows workstations. Pretty simple. I'm doing an EPTLS, and I'm checking my domain controller to say, is this device in my domain computers OU? If it is, and the certificate's good, boom, you're on my network. And then we have our MDM check. So what I'm doing here is a device compliancy status check equals compliant. That does two things for me. One is the MDM's not going to respond with true to that statement if the device doesn't exist in its database. So, and then the other thing I'm checking for is compliance. So I'm checking off two boxes with one query is what I'm doing there. But with the goal of, is this device joined to my MDM? And is it compliant? If it is, permit it on my network and give it access of the security group employees.
Awesome. So back when we were looking at back when I kind of came in and was working with Brock, the clients weren't able to get onto the production network, and we were kind of looking for a solution for this problem. And as we started looking into it, it was very clear what the problem was, everything that we were talking about. So as we were looking through a solution, we wanted kind of three goals as we were going through it. The simpler, the better. So we're no strangers to complex workflows. We can set those up, but with that, there's more maintenance, there's more change management. It just makes things a little bit more complicated. And even when you set it up a year later, when you're trying to look at what's something that went wrong, it's like, how did I set that up again? So we wanted to keep this as simple as possible. With that, we also wanted to future-proof it. So we wanted to play well with Apple, with Jamf, with Intune, with all their MDMs that we used, and especially Cisco ISE. And then lastly, it needs to work for our users. We looked into the profiling engine, but the problem was, well, this only works sometimes, and it doesn't really work for all of our MDMs. So with our users, I swear they're the most important users in the world. And if one of them can't connect to the internet for 20 minutes, like everyone's throwing their hands up and they're like, IT, can't do anything right. So we got to make sure that we're ahead of everything and it's working for our users, and we're accounting for all the variables that we can possibly imagine happening. So with that, I'm going to show you a couple potential solutions that we were looking into before. These may actually work well for your situation. But one is Intune integration. So as you probably know, Jamf talks about it a lot. Jamf has a partnership with Microsoft, and especially with conditional access through Microsoft InTune. This has nothing to do with Cisco ISE. What it does is, just very briefly how it works, you set up this Intune integration with Jamf, and then the client has to, the user of the computer has to log into their Microsoft account through self-service, but then they get this integration. And through Microsoft Intune, you can set, well, if the computer hits these compliancy settings, then they're able to access the Microsoft Office applications. So it's kind of that carrot approach instead of the stick approach, which is kind of cool. Like if you want to use Microsoft Office, make sure your computer is file vault encrypted and you have this endpoint protection software on there and yada, yada, yada. The thing about this that could work for us though, is in order for this integration to work, they have to import the inventory information from Jamf into Intune, including the MAC address. So we were thinking, well, if we have the MAC address there, that's what sets it as, compliant within Cisco ISE. So maybe we don't have to set up Jamf as an MDM. We just keep everything in Intune and import that information into Microsoft Intune. So what did we like about this? Well, first of all, it's completely a native solution. So we don't have to set up any custom stuff. It's just the native integration with Jamf and Intune. And with that, it's all maintained by Jamf and Intune. So we're pretty certain it's going to work with future versions of Mac OS and Jamf and Intune. Some of the things that aren't as good, first of all, it requires user interaction. Not a huge deal breaker, but the workflow we set up is completely automated. This one requires the user to log into their Microsoft account. Also, there's only one MAC address in Microsoft Intune. It's only reporting the Wi-Fi MAC address for a Mac, not the Ethernet MAC address. This solution also only works for Jamf. Jamf has kind of a customized thing with Intune. Most MDMs don't really talk to each other like that. And then lastly, and this is really the nail in the coffin at the time we were looking into it, this product issue through Jamf. So Jamf was reporting the wrong MAC address to Microsoft Intune. So it was reporting the Ethernet MAC address, not the Wi-Fi one. So that doesn't work for 99% of our users because no one plugs into Ethernet anymore. There's not even a little place to plug in here. I need to get a dongle. No one likes dongles. I will say now though, as a disclaimer, so Microsoft Intune now has gotten an update and it reports 2 MAC addresses for Mac computers. Also, that product issue has been fixed, so this could be a viable solution now. And if you want to try it in your environment, please do and let us know how it works. Also, there's this previous JNUC presentation that was done that talked about this issue as well. I'll briefly go over this, but basically they tore out the integration with Intune or with all the MDMs in Cisco ISE, and they created their own custom solution that was kind of running in a DMZ, able to talk to both all the MDMs and Cisco ISE. Very briefly. So the great part about this is it addresses all use cases, but the problem is it was overly complex. It didn't use the native integration. It took a lot of maintenance to maintain because it's kind of creating its own custom solution, which brings change management complications and security risks. You're going to have more attack vectors there and more points of failure. So moving on, take a quick swig of coffee. So we were looking at all these solutions, and mostly the last solution, and thinking, well, we don't want to tear out the native integration with these MDMs and Cisco ISE. So instead, what would it look like if we just kind of helped Cisco ISE along the way? So what if we just told Cisco ISE, all right, go for these groups of devices, go to Intune. For these groups of devices, go to Jamf. And for these groups of devices, go to Mass 360 and so on. So what we ended up doing is manually defining the MDM server name key within ISE based on the MDM it's enrolled in. And to talk about how that works, I'm going to throw this back over to Brock.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So basically, we developed a middleware, which is a fancy name for just a simple script that runs on a server. All it really does is it goes and pulls all the MAC addresses, well, more specifically, all the computer objects from Jamf and their associated MAC addresses. And we reformat that data a little bit, do some checks to make sure that we're not double putting MAC addresses, and we go and post that information to ISE. So what this does here is this is giving ISE the context of what MDM a specific device belongs to by associating that device's MAC address with an MDM. So my MacBook Pro is associated to Jamf as an MDM. And then we simply repeat this process for all the other MDMs. It doesn't matter which MDM it is, as long as I associate a MAC address with an MDM, ISE will then have context of which one to go talk to. So Chris, let's take a look at that little visual to see how this looks. Starting with the policy set first, you can see here that we have Azure and Jamf configured as different MDMs. And the difference between the old policy set and the new policy set is we have the MDM server name equals Azure, or MDM server name equals Jamf. So this is in the condition statement. So when the device actually tries to connect to the wired and wireless, this value is already associated to the object, or the endpoint object, we call it, within ISE. So my MacBook Pro and Chris's MacBook Pro, we connect to the wireless. ISE sees that, hey, MDM server name equals Jamf is set in the object. So I know that I'm going to result in this condition. And then the same statement that I had before, MDM content or compliancy status equals compliant. Because I know that the MDM server name equals Jamf, ISE knows, hey, go talk to Jamf for this API query. Don't talk to any other MDM, talk to Jamf. And this repeats again for every and all MDMs that we have configured, even if you have multiple Azure or Jamf MDMs configured. Next slide. So again, with the visual and the fancy graphics, we associate our devices with their multiple respective MDMs. And then we have our bot, or in this case, our fancy script in between. And then our MDMs in the process of joining will push config to the devices. This allows them to obviously connect with the network, giving them our Wi-Fi profile. Then the device will connect to our network, and our network is going to at one point query ICE, but before that happens, in the background in our script, ICE is going, or our bot is going rather, and grabbing configuration from the respective MDMs. We're taking that data, reformatting that data, putting it to ICE. So then when our device is ready to connect to the network goes and queries ICE, hey, where is this device, or can this device connect? ICE knows I need to talk to Jamf. So I'm going to go and talk to Jamf, and Jamf's going to reply back with a compliancy, and then I'm going to allow that device on the network. Now in the background, and in this case, it's happening every minute. We query all of our MDMs. We're constantly going and grabbing those devices, pulling it, reformatting the data, pushing it to ICE, and that's continual. All the time, just to ensure that we always have the latest list of devices. And that's quite important. Like when you're doing a mass rollout or onboarding of devices to your MDM, you want to make sure that you have the latest list of devices to connect, or that are going to connect to your network.
Awesome. Thanks, Brock. So since this is a Jamf presentation, we want to go over these Jamf API calls a little bit to understand kind of how we did this. So first of all, we'll do a GET request for all the computers, which gives you the ID and the name of the computer. Specifically, what we want is the ID, because that will allow us to do another API command. So we're going to take out just the ID. And then we're going to, we have a database of all the existing IDs that we already did queries on, because we don't want to do a query for every computer. We have like 200 computers in Jamf, so that would take a long time. So instead, we'll compare those two, get the new IDs. So we just isolate the ones we need to do extra API calls on. Then we do additional GET requests to get all the inventory information from the computer, which is a little overkill because all we need to do is get that MAC address from the computers. So then when we isolate the MAC address, then we can use those to post them to Cisco ISE to get to set the MDM server name. I'll shoot this over to Brock to talk about that.
Yeah, so real simple, and I'm not going to get into super detail with the ICE API because this is a Jamf conference. If you guys are interested in what that looks like, we'll provide some details in the show notes. But essentially, we're just looking for the MAC address, and we associate that MAC address with the name of the MDM server name. So really key here is that the configuration under MDM servers, the name you associate to your MDM, Joe Blow MDM 1, that's going to define that MDM. So in our case, we called Intune Azure. So just keep that in mind. But in either case, we associate the MAC address with the MDM server name as being Jamf or Intune or Mass 360 or whatever, and we just push that into ICE into the endpoint database.
Cool. And this workflow is working great for us. We've been doing it for over a year, and we haven't really run into any issues. It's been working awesome. In multiple different scenarios with people connecting in different ways. But as engineers, we'd be remiss if we didn't say, well, there's ways that we can improve this workflow now that we're looking back at it.
Yeah, and Chris, actually, just to say, like, some people may be concerned about the scalability of the solution, like we're querying all the MDMs once every minute. We'll say that this solution for us is working really well for even thousands of clients. Like our Jamf and our Mass 360 or maybe 200 to 500 devices between them, but our Intune MDM has thousands of devices in it, and this has scaled perfectly fine, handling requests from all three MDMs as the devices keep growing, and we don't see any contention at this point. So very happy with how it's scaled.
Awesome. And I think you mentioned this, Brock, but this particular implementation we did, is this the largest implementation of Cisco ISE?
Yeah, we have one of the largest implementations of Cisco ISE, which is kind of crazy. It's around now it's 30 nodes, soon to be 35. So definitely one of the biggest, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. But yeah, looking back, and these are kind of Jamf specific stuff I'm talking about, but looking back, there are ways we can improve this. Webhooks is one of them. And simply put, what webhooks are is they're an extension on the events API within Jamf. They allow you to call a specific action or script when something happens within Jamf. So in our case, this would be great to do when a computer is enrolled. The only reason we didn't do this, honestly, is because we just didn't need to. Since we're running the script once every minute, that's pretty frequent. So we don't have much downtime with computers enrolling in Jamf and not being able to connect to the network. Another thing too is an advanced search. So we're doing 2 API calls, well, multiple API calls, one to get all the IDs for the computer and one to do an API call for each individual computer. You could probably do this more elegantly through one advanced search, which would just pull down all the MAC addresses for all the computers. And with that, you could probably make that even better by using extension attributes, because Jamf only pulls down 2 MAC addresses, but depending on how your computers are set up with like peripherals and dongles and different things like that, sometimes Jamf can get confused on what are the actual MAC addresses for the computers. So it might be better to pull down every MAC address that is on the computer and then just putting all those into Cisco ISE, because that's not really dangerous at all, because they were just pointing it to a specific server. So even if it's pointing like a peripheral, it's just going to point it to make sure it's going to Jamf for MDM compliance. And one other thing I should note too, because this will definitely affect this workflow and probably other workflows that are similar. With Big Sur, Apple's going to start randomly assigning MAC addresses by default. This can be turned off from the client, or you can turn it off via MDM. But once that happens, we probably will need to turn it off via MDM, because it will break the workflow that we have in place if they're randomizing the MAC address, because it won't be the MAC address that we've sent to, Cisco ISE as Jamf, right? So a couple things to keep in mind. Anything else you want to add, Brock?
No, I think that covers it off, really. Yeah.
Awesome. I think we've hit our time. I can't really tell because we started our presentation and then went through a couple times. So we'll see in editing how long it is.
Yeah.
But thanks everyone for listening. This was a great workflow to put together for us, and it's been such a pleasure to be able to talk about it with the community. And I'd love to get your feedback by completing the survey in the widget below. And if you end up doing this workflow yourself, please reach out to us and let us know how it's going. If you've done a workflow similar to this and think you have some improvements on it, please let us know. We want to make sure that the community knows the best way to do this type of workflow. And we think in the next couple years, we're going to be seeing a lot more of the people trying to figure out stuff like this, because a lot of people are using Cisco ISE. It's becoming really popular, and this is a very predictable problem that's going to be happening.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, everyone. Thanks. Stay safe.
Stay safe. Stay strong.